this session. So after this, we're going to have a small break. The last talk of this session is the inimitable Meghan Hall. Hall is a higher education data professional by day and a crime fighter, an amateur hockey analyst by night. She contributes to Hockey Graphs and is most intrigued by hockey played at any strength state besides 5-on-5. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Last individual talk of the day, no pressure, especially because Micah just whispered, don't fuck this up. So, thank you, that's so important. Yes, as Micah just said, I am most interested somehow, I don't know how or why, in hockey that's not played at 5-on-5, so I am sticking with my brand, doing a kind of broad, league-wide view at a game strength that is not 5-on-5. This particular presentation came about after I did a presentation at Rochester a couple months ago about the trend of increasing offense on the penalty kill. And as part of that, I was watching a bunch of penalty kills, and it got me interested in, as you can see in the big words, the discrete, very broad defensive strategies that teams use on the penalty kill. You are probably familiar with the saying that goalies are your most important penalty killers. But not today. I love goalies as much as the next person, but we're going to be looking at penalty kill units, skaters only, so we'll be removing the influence of the goalie as much as possible. So I will not talk about goals rate and things like that. So I apologize to all the goalies out there. They are the most important ones, but I was just not talking about them anymore. So if you remove the influence of the goalie, if you're just talking about basic metrics that all of us have access to, we can probably agree that limiting shots and expected goals is a decent outcome for the skaters on a penalty kill. But where this presentation kind of comes into is to how different teams manage to achieve that goal or not. And so I'm going to talk about four very broad, different strategies that teams use to, again, hopefully find success. So the first one is super basic, which is play good defense, but I cannot stand up here at a hockey analytics conference and just say play good defense without any numbers. So we do have a metric. We're going to look at just your basic rate of shots and expected goals allowed, but instead of the rate being per 60 all the time on the penalty kill, we're going to look solely at the time that the penalty kill spends in their defensive zone. So how well are they playing defense in their defensive zone? Second method, which I have talked about previously in other presentations, is playing good offense. Because obviously, if you are generating offense on the penalty kill, you are by definition not in the power play offensive zone, which is a good thing. So just for that, we're going to look super basic, just rates of shots and expected goals generated on the penalty kill. Third method is kind of related, but just broader. It is how good is a team at just keeping the power play out of the zone, whether or not you're generating offense or not. How good of a job do you do either kind of kicking them out of the zone or just stopping them from entering the zone? And for that, we're just going to look at the percent of time that the power play does not have offensive zone possession. And then the fourth method, which will involve the best product Hockey Twitter has ever produced, which is this tweet about block shots. A lot of teams just try to block a lot of shots on penalty kill. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the percent of all shot attempts that are blocked, and also just the rate of block shots allowed, again, per time in the defensive zone only. I did say I wouldn't talk about goalies anymore, but I would be remiss if I did not mention that some teams do choose to employ a strategy, but we're not going to talk about that today. So since I mentioned zone time, that's obviously not data that is publicly available to fans, so I had to do some data collection of my own. I looked at 12 teams from the most recent full season and ended up looking at over 1,100 minutes of penalty kills, and it's 4-on-5 only. Just one slide of fancy math. I'm just kidding, it's division. It's about the fanciest math that I can do. So on average, we're just looking at a quarter of each of these seasons, of each of these teams' penalty kill minutes in a given season. So it's not a tremendous sample size, but a quarter of a season for 12 teams isn't tiny either. So I think we can make some loose conclusions if we can't make firm ones. And if you're asking the question of, is a quarter of a season enough in order to get kind of a repeatable measure, I just looked at, this is just the unblocked shot attempt rate for in-sample versus out-of-sample games, and the correlation is decent, indicating that this is like a fairly representative sample for a quarter season for this particular metric. And if you use adjusted unblocked shot attempts instead, the correlation even goes up a tiny bit more. And yes, I did say score adjustment for special teams, which is something else that I'm working on, not for this presentation. Hopefully coming to a Hockey Graphs article review, but I figured if I said it out loud, I would finish it. So hopefully that will be coming. I won't bring that up again. So I used a kind of quasi-random method to select my teams. Shown here is just every team from last season and what their unblocked shot attempt rate was, and then the highlighted teams are the ones that I chose. And this is the same, just looking at the offensive side of the penalty kill, and these are the ones I chose. I did this just because I didn't want to accidentally end up by choosing like the 10 worst penalty killing teams, because then we wouldn't get a decent representation. But this is what the team selection ended up being. 4 teams from the Central, 4 teams from the Metro, 3 from the Pacific, and 1 from the Atlantic. Ideally, that would have been a little bit more balanced, but again, it's a quasi-random method that, again, I was mostly trying to get an equal distribution of penalty kill talent. So, with that in mind, these were the questions that I was interested in answering from this data, which, first of all, are the 4 methods that I quickly went over in the beginning. Are those separate skills that penalty kills can have? Which of those methods correlate most strongly with shot quantity, which will just be like the unblocked shot attempt rate, and shot quality, just expected goals. And then lastly, if we can pick out from this data if teams find success in different ways. Because again, when I was doing my previous penalty kill presentation and watching a lot of penalty kills just from the eye test, which we know we cannot trust, it looked like teams were doing things differently. Just from watching so many penalty kills, it looked like teams were doing things differently. So I wanted to see from this if I could put that into quantitative terms. And again, we're just defining success as teams that are able to limit the rate of shots and expected goals on the penalty kill, which is fairly basic. So first are these separate skills. Again, these are just going to be the 4 methods that we talked about at the beginning. And here on the x-axis is just our defensive zone defense, which we will call it, even though I probably should have spent time thinking of something that is not so repetitive. But, and then on the y-axis is just the unblocked shot attempts generated. So we're just looking if there's any relationship between how well you play defense in the defensive zone and how well you generate shots from the penalty kill. And it appears, at least in the sample, that these are completely uncorrelated. They are unrelated skills. And it's similar if you look at, again, we're still maintaining your defensive zone defense. God, that's awful. I'm going to say that like 100 more times, I'm sorry. On the x-axis, and then on the y is the percent of time that you were out of the power play's offensive zone. And again, those do not really seem to be correlated skills, which is very interesting. This is also not surprising that there is a strong relationship between the ability to generate shots on penalty kill and how well you do keeping the power play out of the zone, because by definition, when you're generating shots, you're out of the zone. So that's a more positive relationship that we could expect. And same if you look at blocked shots, there's a pretty decent negative relationship between your defensive zone defense and the blocked shots allowed. So, excuse me. So second question I was curious is, of all of these methods, which ones and to what degree do they correlate with both shot quantity and shot quality? At first, this really should not be a surprise. Playing good defense in your defensive zone is pretty important in terms of limiting shots overall. That has a pretty strong relationship. This was the least surprising thing I found in the whole thing. Because even if teams do, of all the teams that I track, even teams that do a really great job keeping the power play out of its offensive zone, it's still in there a good 45% of the time. So, very important to play, to limit the amount of shots you give up per time in the defensive zone. There is a decently strong negative relationship between the unblocked shot rate and the percent of time you spend, percent of time you can keep the power play out of the zone, which is good because this is kind of what I was most curious about. It certainly seemed like that would be true. But interestingly, again, here on the y-axis is our shot quantity measure, just the unblocked shot attempts. And if you change it to the expected goals allowed, you still have a negative relationship, but it's a little bit less. So being able to keep the power play out of the zone correlates decently with your shot quantity, but less so with the quality of shots that you give up. And also here we're keeping the same y-axis, which is just the unblocked shot attempts allowed. And then here on the x, we have the ability to generate offense on the penalty kill. And there's a slight negative relationship there in this particular sample. When I've looked at other data, I have found stronger correlations with this, so it could just be a measure of this sample, but there was a decently correlated small relationship there. So teams that are able to generate offense on the penalty kill do a better job of limiting shots. And it gets pretty interesting when you start looking at block shots, because here on the X we have the percent of shot attempts blocked, and there's a really strong relationship with the more shots you block, you generally are doing a better job on the penalty kill. And that's the same whether you're looking at this measure here, which is the percent of shot attempts blocked, or just your rate of blocked shot attempts given time in the defensive zone. So blocking shots also fairly important, correlates strongly here. And the last question I was curious to answer here was if teams could find success in different ways using these different methods. So what I have is just kind of a basic template of all of these metrics. These two here to the left of the dotted line are standard penalty kill evaluation metrics, just the shot rate, the unblocked shot attempt rate, and the expected goals rate against. And then these two are those same measures but in the defensive zone only. And then just your shot attempt rate for, again, the measure generating offense on penalty kill, percent of time you're not in the power play offensive zone, and then the block shot rate. And all of these measures, just for these particular views, they've all been scaled, so it makes for easy comparisons. And in every case, the metric that is better for the penalty kill, that would be like generating more shots, giving up fewer shots, etc., is like up. So you want to be up. So of all the teams that I looked at, there were a couple teams, like Florida and Vegas, who were just pretty good all around. They had good overall metrics, which again are the two on the left, and they really did that by just kind of being good at everything. And it got interesting when I was looking at a couple other teams like the Flyers, who, if you look here, they were extremely good at keeping the power play out of its offensive zone. And they also did a pretty good job of generating offense on the penalty kill in this sample. And it was a very good thing that they did because they did a really shitty job when they let them into the offensive zone. And their expected goals rate against was like literally all off the charts. But they were able to keep them out of the zone for so long that their overall shot rate was above average because they were able to keep them out so well, even though they, again, this sample did a really horrendous job when they let them in. And then if you look at a team like Edmonton, also fun fact that no one else would care about except for me, but Edmonton orange is very close to, but very slightly different from Flyers orange. Fun fact, it's less blue. Micah appreciates my color. Anyway, so Edmonton is kind of the opposite story. They did a pretty bad job. They didn't really generate any kind of offense of their own on the penalty kill, and they did not do a particularly good job of keeping the opposing power play out of its offensive zone. But when they were in there, they did a really good job actually playing defense and limiting shots. So they were also able to have an above average shot rate against on the penalty kill in a completely different way than the Flyers did. And then some teams, I'm sorry to hate on the New York teams, were just also kind of bad at everything. So the limitations to this data, there are a lot. Over 1,100 minutes of penalty kill data is not a terrible sample size, but it's still fairly small. I am one person who does this in her spare time for literally negative money. So that's pretty decent. And also just, at least from what I've looked at so far, there's still a lot of missing variables. It would be pretty important to know who's playing on penalty kill and what types of power plays that they're facing, and all sorts of other confounding variables that would certainly change the result that you would get here. So the takeaways from, again, these main questions that I was looking at, there's evidence that there are possibly separate skills, particularly with playing defense in the defensive zone and the ability to generate offense, which kind of tracks. Logically, that makes sense. And also, I was a little more surprised to see that there is evidence that it is a different skill to play good defense and also to keep the power play out of the zone. That those do not appear, at least in this sample, to be super highly correlated. For the second question, in terms of what correlates most strongly to our basic measures of penalty kill success, defensive of defense is most important. That was not a surprise. Keeping the power play out correlates with the shot quantity that you give up, much more than the shot quality. And lastly, the more block shots also seem to be really important, no matter what kind of metric you look at for block shots. Correlates more to fewer shots given up. And lastly, there was an indicator that teams could have different profiles of they were able to find penalty kill success in different ways. I was most, personally, from why I started this project and what I was looking at with my eyes, I was most satisfied to see teams like Philadelphia and Edmonton that were achieving almost very similar penalty kill results in really different ways in terms of these metrics that I tracked. So personally, this kind of whole thing was worth it because I validated one thing that I saw with my eyes, which was very exciting. So future work in this area, definitely more data, both in terms of bigger samples for the particular team. Again, a quarter of a season is decent, but could be better, and also just being able to look at more teams to see really if teams can, that would give more evidence to the way that teams could create success in different ways. Also, as part of this project, I also tracked all entries and exits for special teams for all of these, so hopefully that will inform more projects that I can do with this data. Just one that I wanted to look at right off the bat was in terms of teams who are good at keeping the power play out of the zone. Again, with my eyes, I can tell, I've watched so many minutes of penalty kills, is that some teams are terrible at entry defense and will just let them into the zone, but are very good at dumping it back out, and some teams just will not let them enter at all. And so I would have the data to look at that. So that could possibly inform more of this work. And also, as I mentioned in the limitations section, being able to look at a lot more confounders around this data in terms of who's playing on the penalty kill, who you're facing on the power play, if teams do different things, whether you're facing a 4-forward power play or a 3-forward power play, all sorts of other things that you need to put into this data in order to get a bigger picture of what all of this really means. All of my data in terms of these metrics that I track, it's available online. I will put the link to my Twitter as soon as I get back to my computer. So you can see here at the bottom, you can see all of those charts that I showed before for every team and see what all the different numbers are. And just a few people to thank. I will never give a talk on the penalty kill without thanking Mike, because he was the one who got me into the penalty kill in the first place. I want to give a shout out to NHL TV because everyone hates on it all the time. Rightfully so, sometimes it sucks, but it was very, I could not have done this project without it, and it mostly did not screw up. So it deserves one accolade. How much everyone hates on NHL TV. Thank you to Josh and Luke. I tracked a lot of this data with my own eyes and stopwatch, but all of the shot data and all of the expected goals data was taken via their scraper. And I complained to a lot of people because 1,200 minutes is a lot of minutes to watch the penalty kills in 3 weeks. So, and thank you to Shuckers and everyone here for coordinating such a great conference. Thank you.
We'll start here.
Hi, I was curious if you've looked at all at penalty kill goals and which profile may lead to more penalty kill goals, or if that's something to possibly look at in the future.
No, I think that's interesting. As I said kind of at the beginning, I didn't really look at goals at all because dealing with goalies kind of scares me, and how to best account for that. But I think that's an obvious jumping off point here to look at that too.
Great job. That was really interesting. It's more like a thought for Edmonton and Philly. I'd be curious to see how they do on face-offs, because presumably if you're really good on face-offs, you're probably going to clear the puck and eat away 10 seconds. And if you're really bad at blocking shots as well,
Yeah.
hopefully there'll be more face-offs that you can win. So in the future, I just want to see what that result is like with Philly and Edmonton, because I think that'd be.
Yes, I think that is really interesting, because I have done a little bit of ad hoc work on penalty kill face-offs, and you can see, I'll try to remember to retweet the tweet, but you can see if you look at all the cumulative shots on a power play as to which team won the opening face-off. If the penalty kill team wins the initial face-off, there is a significant dip in the first like 20 seconds of the power play, obviously. And also when I was doing this data, I tracked, I mean, obviously we know from play-by-play data which team won the face-off, but I also tracked if the penalty kill team was able to clear the puck, because they're very annoying when a penalty kill team wins the face-off and then doesn't manage to clear the puck. I was rooting for them while I was watching. A lot of them are not good at it, so I tracked that also, because that's even, because the face-off is a good proxy, but it's obviously most important for the teams that are able to win the face-off and then consequently clear the puck. So I do have that data too, so hopefully, again, this will inform more presentations, but that's a really good point that I should have mentioned.
Perfect, thank you. Just wondering, just visually seeing it and maybe looking a bit at the data, was there anything that you noticed maybe in the different defensive unit groups, maybe on a player personnel perspective, that led to one strategy, stopping at the blue line, preventing entries, or defending more in zone? And if you can maybe comment on if you noticed something, and if you did, what it was.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I didn't particularly have gotten into, I think that's kind of the clear next step as to which players play on the penalty kill, but in my previous presentation that I did at Rochester, I looked at the offensive and defensive skill of players on the penalty kill and how that's changing, and I think it would be interesting to see, because there is a trend that teams are putting more offensively skilled forwards on their penalty kill, and I'm curious to see how that would look with this data. Like, I would presume that they're probably generating more shots, but maybe those teams also focus more on the entry defense side of things than like the defending in the zone.
Good question in the back.
Would you find it, like, for teams that have kind of weak defenses, such as Toronto, would you find it, yeah, that's a shot, take it. Would you think it'd be beneficial for them to play, especially in the minor system, they've been working on developing penalty killers, and like Capman, Marner, they're all very good adept penalty killers, so do you think it'd be beneficial for them to play a 3 forwards, 1 defense system, or on the contrary, a 3 defensemen, 1 forward system?
It is my dream and Mike's dream. Me and Mike, we are waiting with bated breath for some team to put 3 forwards on a penalty kill so we can look and see what it looks like. We got really excited because we thought that Detroit did last year, but it's, what's that guy's name? That damn guy that now is in Tampa, and he like plays, yes, and he plays as a, yes, he's got the wrong position. He plays at the wrong position and he's listed out. We were so excited for like 20 minutes and then that was trash. So I'm hoping that I would personally love for some team to play 3 forwards on the penalty kill just so Mike and I could enjoy it and see what it looks like. But I think that would be interesting. And I'm surprised there's been much less development in terms of positional alignment on the penalty kill as opposed to the power play, because I don't think barely any teams also use 3 defenders on the penalty kill, but I'd be interested to see if they did that too, just so we could have data on it.
All right, we have time for one more. Yes, here.
Is there any difference that you found between the second period and the first and third, where they're longer, or it's harder to get to the bench to change?
No, that's actually really interesting. I didn't look at periods at all yet. And I had mentioned that I'm doing a little bit of work on, because I found some evidence that on the power play, the shot attempts could benefit from a little adjustment, like they do at 5-on-5 to take into account the score of the venue. So I'd be interested to repeat this with those just to see if anything had changed. But the period thing is interesting too.
Okay, so that's the last part of the session. Just before we thank Meghan again, I wanted to tell you this is the long break. After this break, so we're going to get back here at 3:50, so 10 minutes before. And so we're going to have an interview with the Youngren twins and with Brad from National Patrick. Then after that, it's only a little short break. So this is the long break. We're going to have this poster session outside. So go take a look at the posters. There should be a lot more copies. So thank you all very much. And thank you for the